You finally got the courage to pray, you humbled yourself, opened your heart to God, and asked Him for help, but instead of peace you got pressure, instead of breakthrough came breakdown, and now you're wondering, why does everything seem worse after I prayed? That question has crossed the minds of many sincere believers, and today we're going to talk about why that happens and what God might actually be doing when your life seems to fall apart after you give it to Him. Let me take you to a moment in the Bible that's both powerful and painful. In Exodus, God hears the cries of His people in Egypt. They've been slaves for generations, suffering under Pharaoh's brutal hand, and God answers. He sends Moses with one simple message: let my people go. But here's what most people forget: after Moses delivered God's message, Pharaoh got angrier. He didn't set the Israelites free, he made their lives worse. He increased their workload, he punished them, he turned their hope into pain, and the people cried out again, this time not in hope, but confusion. God, we prayed, and now it's worse. Maybe that's where you are. You've been faithful, you've been praying, you're trying to walk in obedience, but suddenly friends are falling away, doors are closing, stress is rising, and your heart is wondering, did I do something wrong? Let me tell you something the enemy doesn't want you to hear. Sometimes things get worse because God just shook the foundation. See, the Israelites weren't just stuck physically, they were stuck spiritually. Slavery had become normal. God's deliverance didn't begin when Pharaoh let them go, it began when God disturbed what they were used to, and sometimes God has to disrupt what's comfortable to prepare us for what's coming. Ephesians 6 verse 12 reminds us, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. The moment you start praying, you've entered a war. Heaven moves, but hell reacts. Your prayer shifts the spiritual atmosphere, but not without resistance. That's why things often get worse before they get better, because the enemy knows you're getting close, and he wants you to stop praying. He wants you to lose faith. He wants you to walk away before the breakthrough. But here's the truth: when things get worse, it's not a sign that God left you, it's a sign that something is breaking, that chains are rattling, that Pharaoh is panicking, that the enemy feels the shift and is trying to hold on. That moment where life feels hardest, it's often the moment right before God opens the Red Sea. So don't walk away now, don't stop praying, don't quit believing. James 1:2-4 says, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy, for when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. God allows pressure not to punish you, but to prepare you. When the Israelites finally left Egypt, they didn't just walk out quietly, they walked out with wealth, with purpose, with the hand of God leading them. But to get there, they had to go through the worst. So what's God doing in your situation? Maybe He's exposing the false foundations, maybe He's tearing down idols, maybe He's closing the door you've been knocking on because He knows what's behind it isn't for you, or maybe He's letting the fire refine you before He sends you out. Romans 8 verse 28 says, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God. Everything, even the pain, even the delay, even the moment when it all feels worse. So next time life hits harder after you pray, don't panic. It might just mean the battle's intensifying, because victory is near. God never abandons those who seek Him. He hears, He sees, He answers, but sometimes His answer starts with a storm before it ends in freedom. If this message touched your heart, don't scroll away. Like this video, comment below what verse or part spoke to you most. Share this with someone who needs this reminder right now, and most of all, subscribe to One Bible Verse for more real, raw, faith-filled videos that bring God's Word to life. Remember, if things just got worse, you might be closer to breakthrough than you think. Have you ever wondered why the woman who walks away without raising her voice is the one a man remembers until his final breath? Not the loud one. Not the one who begs or explains or breaks down into 1,000 scattered truths. No, the one who becomes silence. Who becomes shadow. Who becomes the mirror he never dared to look into until it was too late. In the depths of Carl Jung's teachings, there lies an uncomfortable truth. A man is not haunted by the woman herself, but by the reflection of his own unconscious she awakens. She does not cling, she does not chase, and that, precisely, is what makes her unforgettable. Her absence is not a void. It is a presence in negative space. A force not gone but withdrawn. Unavailable. Unyielding. To the uninitiated, she appears cold. Distant. Detached. But beneath that stillness is a storm, the storm of a woman who once gave too much, loved without measure, poured her essence into the cup of a man who could not hold her depth. And when the cup shattered, she did not weep. She watched. She waited. And then, she disappeared. But she did not leave. She became his shadow. Not the kind that follows him in sunlight. The kind that follows him in dreams. In regret. In quiet rooms where no one speaks. She became the phantom companion to his guilt, his projections, his unresolved inner child. She became the feminine embodiment of everything he refused to integrate. And now he sees her everywhere. In the curve of a stranger's smile. In the softness of a scent. In a silence that echoes louder than words ever could. She didn't plan to become his shadow. She earned it. You see, the woman who becomes a man's shadow is not just a memory, she is a psychological reckoning. She is the personification of the anima, the soul image Jung wrote of. Not the fantasy he projected in the beginning, but the unveiled force that strips illusion bare. She is not sweet comfort. She is the test. The threshold. The spiritual mirror. He cannot hold her, because to truly hold her, he would have to hold himself. And most men are not ready for that. They say a man falls in love with a woman's presence, but obsesses over her mystery. What they never say is that mystery is often born from suffering. From silence sharpened by betrayal. From years of overgiving, unseeing, and being placed second to a world of distractions and half-grown egos. The woman who once over-explained has now become a riddle. And in her enigma, she becomes untouchable. He tries to move on. But every new connection is a faint echo of her depth. A shallow imitation of the intimacy he never fully stepped into. Because the moment he began to see the real her, not the fantasy, but the truth, was the moment he recoiled. Truth demands transformation. And transformation is painful. So instead, he clings to memory. Rewrites history in his favor. Tells himself she was too much. Too emotional. Too intense. But late at night, when his mind is quiet, when the bravado has slipped away, he feels the pull. Not to her, but to something in her he never understood, a stillness that held him accountable, a gaze that saw through his masks, a love that asked for more than he was ready to give. And that is what he cannot forget. The woman who becomes his shadow is not bitter. She is not waiting. She is not angry anymore. She simply exists within him now, a symbol of what he refused to grow into. A psychic imprint of the feminine he rejected, not because he did not want her, but because he did not know how to want himself. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever poured your soul into a connection, only to feel invisible in the end? Have you ever watched a man adore you in the beginning, only to slowly shrink away the moment he saw you weren't here to entertain him, you were here to elevate him? Women like you, women with depth, you are not loved easily. You are remembered. And that is your quiet power. The world will try to convince you that you must be more palatable. Softer. Easier. But ease does not awaken the soul. Comfort does not demand growth. And a man at war with himself will always reject the woman who demands he lay his weapons down. You are not too much. You are the mirror he wasn't ready for. Jung taught that the human psyche is a battle between the conscious and unconscious self, and that until a man makes the unconscious conscious, it will rule his life, and he will call it fate. You were never his fate. You were his mirror. And that reflection was too bright for a man still hiding in shadows. But now, you have become the shadow. And while he may forget your voice, your words, your warmth, he will never forget what you represented. You are not the fantasy. You were the awakening. And awakenings never leave quietly. They rumble. They haunt. They come back in the eyes of every woman who isn't you. He will search for you in women who are safer, simpler, less demanding. And in their safety, he will ache. Because nothing about you is lukewarm. You burned. And he was too afraid of the fire to realize that you were also the warmth. And maybe he will never say it aloud. Maybe he'll convince himself he dodged something heavy. But in the echo chambers of his regret, he will meet you again. Not as the woman standing before him, but as the energy curled around every moment he felt most alive and most afraid. You were the embodiment of his shadow. The one he didn't dare love completely. The one he thought he could replace. But shadows, they follow. And until he faces you within himself, he'll never truly be free. Some women don't leave the way others do. They don't slam doors or throw accusations into the wind. They don't block, curse, or announce their exits like final scenes in a tragic romance. They slip out through the cracks of your soul, silently, gracefully, without ceremony. And in doing so, they become unforgettable. What haunts a man is not always what was said, but what was left unsaid. Not the storm, but the absence after it. The hollow silence where once a woman's presence pulsed like fire. And this silence, it is not void. It is her, pressed into the edges of every memory, breathing through the ache of what he didn't protect. He remembers her not because she was loud, but because she disappeared without begging to be seen. She was never a lesson he studied, she was the final exam he failed. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the unconscious feminine within every man. It reveals itself not through theory, but through the women who crack open his sense of self. The ones who know things he doesn't say. The ones who stir emotion before logic. The ones who unsettle his certainty and force him to feel. She, the woman he now can't forget, was not chaos. She was his unfinished work. The unexplored path of his psyche. She challenged not only his ego, but his identity. Her love did not comfort, it called him out. And, because he was not ready, he labeled her too intense. Too demanding. Too much. But the truth is far more threatening. She wasn't too much, she was exactly enough. It was he who was too small. When a woman like her walks away, she does so with quiet knowing. Not because she lacks love, but because she refuses to barter her worth for half-grown affection. She has touched the void of emotional abandonment before. She knows how it tastes, how it echoes. And when she feels it returning in a man too afraid to see her fully, she steps back into herself and locks the door behind her. But the bond isn't severed. Not really. It mutates. It transforms. She becomes the phantom weight in his psyche. Not because she is cruel, but because the unconscious cannot be erased. It must be faced. She is now woven into the very architecture of his inner world. He will see her in symbols, in archetypes, in women he cannot fully love because none of them demand what she did the truth. She didn't want his money, his status, his distractions. She wanted his soul. And he ran from it. Because giving a woman your soul means knowing it first. And that is what most men avoid, the confrontation with their own hidden wounds. The boy inside still seeking motherly validation. The man unsure of his value without power. The lover who mistakes control for intimacy. So he avoids her now, not in action, but in integration. He dates women who don't ask hard questions. He builds a life padded with success, never silence. He speaks of growth, but never grief. But deep down, he feels her. She is the one who looked at him and saw everything. Not just the man he claimed to be, but the man buried beneath fear and pride. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She simply held up the mirror and waited. And when he looked away, she didn't beg. She vanished. With elegance. With dignity. And that is the story his ego can't rewrite. Most men believe they can replace a woman. They look outward. Swipe, search, seduce. But archetypes don't fade with time. They deepen. And the longer he avoids her memory, the more power it gains. Because she has now become internalized. She is not just a person, she is a wound, a warning, a whisper in the night. The woman he once held in his arms now lives in the chambers of his unhealed heart. She became his shadow. Not in bitterness. Not in vengeance. But in the purity of her withdrawal. Because in truth, she never wanted to haunt him. She wanted to love him. She offered depth, not demand. She opened her soul like a book, and he skimmed the pages. She spoke in the language of essence, and he replied in surface-level desire. He didn't lose her because he wasn't enough. He lost her because he wasn't ready. There's a sacred power in a woman who walks away without closing her heart, who detaches not with rage, but reverence. She doesn't demonize. She doesn't destroy. She simply lets him go and returns to herself. And that return, that inward turn, is where her power multiplies. Because the woman who has met her own darkness doesn't fear being alone. She has danced with demons, healed from betrayals, and still chooses softness. Her silence is not passive, it's a boundary. Her absence is not emptiness, it's clarity. He sees this now. And yet, it is too late. Or maybe it was always meant to be. You see, some women enter a man's life not to stay, but to awaken. They are catalysts. Archetypes. Reminders from the soul that something deeper is being asked. And though the man may mourn her, he also fears her. Because loving her would have meant losing his illusions. And he's still not ready to let them die. But the woman? She is not waiting anymore. She has become whole. The woman who has become whole does not linger at thresholds where she's no longer welcomed. She no longer tries to convince a half-awake man to see her fully. She no longer attempts to translate her soul into a language he hasn't yet learned. She simply exists, rooted, vast, luminous in her aloneness. And that, paradoxically, makes her even more magnetic. Because she is no longer performing, no longer shrinking, no longer chasing the love she once believed she had to earn. Her power now comes not from being seen, but from seeing herself clearly, fiercely, without distortion. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. She has awakened. And that awakening makes her presence unbearable to the man still asleep. She did not become cold. She became contained. No longer leaking energy into places that drained her. No longer apologizing for her depth. No longer translating her intuition into digestible fragments. She speaks less now, not because she has less to say, but because she knows most ears cannot hold her frequency. The woman who becomes a man's shadow is not a ghost, she is a guide. Not one he can call upon at will, but one he must summon from within. She is the missing feminine principle he must integrate, the silent echo of emotional truth he must face if he ever wants to become whole himself. But not every man will. Some will spend their lives avoiding her memory. They will call her names to suit their ego. Label her intense, unstable, manipulative. But these are not her labels. They are his defenses. He cannot let her go because she was not just a woman. She was a mirror, and the image he saw was too raw. She cracked open his sense of self, not to destroy, but to reveal. And revelation is painful for the ego that clings to certainty, to control, to the illusion of independence. She never asked for control, only truth. And that is the most dangerous request of all, because truth demands change. Truth demands responsibility. Truth demands the death of the small self. And men raised in emotional survival will fight this death with all their might. But deep down, he knows. He knows he lost more than a partner. He lost the chance to grow, to transcend, to feel something sacred. He cannot name it because it was beyond words. It was her energy, the quiet certainty in her gaze, the way she loved without flattery, the way she could hold space without needing to fill it, the way she would rather walk alone than settle for half-hearted love. And in that, she became untouchable. He will see her again, not in body, but in fragments, a song that stirs longing, a scent that chokes the breath, a dream that wakes him sweating in the dark. She will haunt the parts of him that remain unclaimed. Not out of cruelty, but because the psyche remembers what the ego tries to bury. And in every woman who follows, he will search. Search for her fire, her stillness, her knowing. But they will not have it, because they were not forged in the same furnace. They have not burned through their illusions. They have not done their shadow work. They do not carry that ancient, holy ache in their silence. Only she did. You, perhaps, have carried this ache too. You, the woman who gave all without being asked. Who loved deeply and was met with fear. Who offered healing and received withdrawal. Do not regret it. Do not harden. Because the women who become unforgettable are the ones who loved without agenda. Who gave with soul. Who left with dignity. You were not weak for opening, you were brave. And your leaving was not a failure. It was your freedom. You became his shadow not because you were less, but because you became more than he was ready to hold. And now he holds you in absence. He wears your memory like armor. He denies it by day and dreams it by night. You were never meant to be easily understood. You are a woman of myth, of symbol, of sacred feminine intelligence. Your love does not beg. It transforms. And in that transformation, It breaks everything false. A man either rises or retreats. But you? You rise regardless. Because your worth was never in how he saw you, it was in how you returned to yourself after he looked away. That return is your power. That return is your realignment. That return is where you shed the illusion of need and awaken as woman, sovereign, whole, unyielding. The woman who becomes a man's shadow never planned to stay unseen. She simply refused to remain misunderstood. And in doing so, she became the symbol he cannot shake. She lives in his hesitation now, in the way he pauses before speaking truth, in the discomfort he feels in shallow intimacy, in the silence he cannot fill, no matter how many bodies he pulls close. She became his shadow, because she was the light he wasn't ready for. To become a man's shadow is not a curse. It is a consequence of power unrecognized, of love mishandled, of depth met with fear. The feminine that steps away with grace leaves behind something far more haunting than rage, resonance. She does not scream her value, she simply embodies it. And that embodiment lingers in his psyche, his patterns, his silence. Carl Jung knew that the feminine, when fully awakened within a man, does not flatter the ego. It disrupts it. The anima, the soul feminine, emerges not as a soft muse, but as a spiritual reckoning. She forces confrontation with the unloved places, the unintegrated memories, the illusions that shield him from wholeness. And so when you loved him, it was not just romance. It was revelation. It was invitation to evolve. But evolution requires death. The death of performance. The death of the facade. The death of his carefully curated masculine ideal. He wasn't ready to die that death. He wanted you to reflect his image, not dismantle it. He wanted warmth without fire, depth without pressure, connection without reflection. And when you saw too much, he recoiled. Because being seen is terrifying when one is still fragmented. So you left. Not to punish, but to preserve. You did not shrink yourself to keep him comfortable. You withdrew your energy like the moon from the tide, slowly, silently, with cosmic timing. And in that quiet retreat, you became unforgettable. Not because of the way you loved him, but because of the way you loved yourself in the end. He can't let you go because your energy still holds the part of him he abandoned. You didn't just awaken his heart, you rattled his unconscious. You brushed against the boy who still yearns for mother's approval, the man who fears emotional nakedness, the soul crying for connection but terrified of intimacy. You were not a lover. You were a threshold. And thresholds are never comfortable. They are not soft beds. They are sacred fires. You asked for no promises, only presence. And when he could not stay present, you did the most radical thing a woman can do. You disappeared with grace. Do you know how rare that is? Most people collapse at the loss of love. They beg. They scream. They shatter. But not you. You mourned privately. You alchemized your ache into strength. You cried, yes, but you cried without surrendering your dignity. And that's what he can't forget. Not your body. Not your words. But your stillness. The knowing in your eyes as you stepped back into yourself. The silence that followed, which said, I am done giving where I am not met. And that silence now lives in him. Not as guilt, but as a constant invitation to become worthy, not of you, but of himself. You see, he never truly lost you. He lost access to the reflection of the man he could have become. Because in your presence, he glimpsed his potential. And now, in your absence, he sits with the pain of possibility unclaimed. Jungian psychology teaches that the shadow, when ignored, does not disappear. It festers. It rules in silence. It sabotages. And until it is brought to the light of consciousness, it will continue to manifest as regret, longing, emotional paralysis. You are that shadow now. Not a monster. Not a ghost. But a mirror. He'll move on, yes, or try. He'll touch other skin, laugh other laughs. But every now and then, he'll feel a phantom tug in the chest, in the gut, in the soul. A whisper, she saw me, and I turned away. That kind of knowing never fades. And you no longer carry the ache. You carry wisdom. You carry the fierce calm of a woman who's done the work, who's met her own shadow and no longer fears being unseen. You do not chase. You choose. Your love is no longer poured freely into unready vessels. It is offered like sacred wine to those who can hold it with reverence. And this discernment, this quiet sovereignty, it makes you dangerous. Not because you seek power, but because you are power, undistorted, embodied, reclaimed. He remembers you now not just as a woman, but as an initiation. A storm cloaked in softness. A silence louder than need. A presence that called forth everything real and left when he flinched. And in that leaving you ascended. No longer a participant in his chaos. No longer a casualty of his fear. You rose not in vengeance, but in truth. You became his shadow. Not because you dwell in darkness, but because you once brought light into it and walked away when it was refused. There is a moment, always, when a man sits alone and the world grows quiet. Not the external world. The internal one. The one he has drowned in noise, numbed with distraction, chased into busyness. But silence is not defeated so easily. It waits. It settles. It returns. And in that moment, it is not her laughter that haunts him. It is not even her body. It is the feeling of being seen without judgment, held without demand, loved without transaction. That feeling was her gift, and her departure was its removal. Most men do not realize what they had until they can no longer access it. Because real feminine presence is not performative. It is not loud. It does not cling. It doesn't negotiate for attention. It is felt, deeply, quietly, often misunderstood until it is gone. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And she, the woman he remembers, did transform him. Not fully, not forever, but enough to leave a mark. Enough to imprint a memory he cannot scrub away, no matter how many new faces he tries to use as solvent. Because you weren't just any woman. You were the initiator. The one who came with stillness instead of seduction. With insight instead of illusion. With energy that didn't scream, but commanded. Not because you tried, but because you were. A woman who has embodied her wounds and transmuted them into wisdom cannot be mimicked. She holds an energetic frequency that cannot be faked. You didn't come into his life to please, you came to reveal. And in that revelation, his ego flinched. Because you did not orbit around his identity. You asked for his essence. And he couldn't find it. Because a man who has never met his own inner world will always recoil from a woman who lives in hers. Her depth terrifies him. Her presence unnerves him. Not because she is unsafe, but because she makes his illusions unsafe. She threatens to unravel everything he built as a defense, the bravado, the charm, the curated masculinity. You didn't want the mask. You wanted the man. The man beneath the posturing. The boy beneath the anger. The soul beneath the silence. And when you reached into those spaces with tender strength, he mistook your grace for danger. But that mistake was his undoing. Because now he knows. He knows you were not asking for too much, you were asking for truth. You were asking for the kind of presence that costs a man his patterns. You were asking him to evolve. And he wasn't ready to die that death. So you became his shadow, not in bitterness, but in balance. In the way all unmet invitations linger. In the way all unlived possibilities whisper. You are the dream that awoke something real and then vanished. The proof that he could have gone deeper, but didn't. He doesn't speak your name anymore. But he thinks it. He feels it. In the space between distraction and sleep. In the quiet panic of another hollow relationship. In the echo of a look someone else gives him, a look almost like yours, but not quite. And that's the tragedy. Because he will search for you, not knowing he is searching for himself. You were the gateway. The mirror. The sacred test. And he failed, not because he was cruel, but because he was unready. But you are no longer standing at the gate. You've gone through your own. You've become woman in full bloom, untouched by the need for validation, untethered from external confirmation. The love you once gave away like breath is now inward, whole, sovereign. You are not cold, you are clear. You are not distant, You are discerning. And that is why your absence speaks louder than presence. That is why he cannot let you go. Because it was never about the surface. Never about the sex, the smile, the sound of your voice. It was about what your presence required of him and what he couldn't yet give. You did not ask for perfection. Only presence. Not performance, truth. Not fantasy, integrity. And that is what the awakened feminine asks of every man. Can you meet me, not as your ego, but as your soul? Most cannot. But some, after years, lifetimes, silence, learn to rise. Maybe he will. Maybe not. But you? You already have. There is a profound stillness in a woman who no longer waits. Not the stillness of defeat, but of arrival. She has arrived in herself. After the fire. After the leaving. After the aching clarity of watching a man recoil from what was real. And now her stillness is not silence. It is power. Unapologetic. Undeniable. Untouched by the chaos of those who never understood her. She no longer moves to be seen. She no longer speaks to be heard. She is no longer concerned with who stays or who forgets. Because the woman who has become the shadow is no longer of the story. She is its ending. Its echo. Its lesson. He still remembers the beginning, how easy it was, how magnetic, how her presence felt like stepping into something sacred. But he mistook that sacredness for softness. Mistook her love for a given, not a gift. Thought she would remain, even as he slowly stopped showing up. But the feminine, the true feminine, does not tolerate spiritual laziness. She is patience, yes, but not passivity. She waits, but she does not linger. She offers, but she does not beg. And when her soul has been dishonored, she retracts. Entirely. Not just her affection, but her energy. Not just her body, but her frequency. He didn't feel it at first. But now he feels it everywhere. He sees her reflection in his own emotional absence. He hears her voice in the silence between shallow conversations. He senses her presence in the void that no new woman can fill. Because no new woman can be her. Not because she was better, but because she was true. And truth does not compete. It simply is. It remains. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious speaks through symbols, through dreams, through the irrational pull of memory. And that is what she has become now, not a woman of flesh and voice, but a symbol. A living metaphor for the life he almost had, the love he almost held, the self he never became. And that is what makes her unforgettable. Because he does not miss her. He misses the version of himself that only she saw. The man who could have been. The man who was willing to go deep. The man who was brave enough to surrender ego for essence. But he abandoned that version the moment she required his presence. The moment she asked for more than performance. The moment she stood in her truth and said, "I will not shrink for you." And that boundary, that sacred refusal, became the line he could not cross. He went back to comfort. To control. To women who didn't ask. To lives that didn't challenge. To love that didn't see. But comfort is not peace. Control is not safety. And silence, when filled with regret, becomes a symphony of suffering. So he wears her memory now like a cloak, invisible but heavy. He builds new routines. Creates new narratives. But every so often, the cloak tightens. And he remembers. He remembers the way she looked at him, not with need, but with knowing. He remembers the way her presence made him feel honest, even when he lied. He remembers the quiet strength in her goodbye. And it breaks something in him. Something pride can't fix. Something time doesn't heal. He cannot let her go, because she was never just her. She was the convergence of everything he denied. His softness. His longing. His ache to be fully known and still fully loved. And now, that ache has a face. A name. A memory that refuses to fade. But she has not stayed. She has moved through grief. Through mourning. Through the hollow ache of watching a love collapse beneath the weight of unspoken truths. And on the other side, she found herself. Not the self she was with him, but the self that always was beneath the pleasing, beneath the pouring, beneath the hoping. She does not seek now. She chooses. She chooses peace over potential. She chooses solitude over suffering. She chooses men who show up whole or not at all. Because the woman who has done her shadow work no longer negotiates with chaos. She does not try to rescue what was never hers to fix. She does not mistake chemistry for connection. She knows her worth, not as a concept, but as a felt reality. Her energy speaks louder than her words now. And that is why men feel her before they see her. That is why he still feels her. Because her absence was never empty, it was alive. Alive with the love she once gave. Alive with the truth she once offered. Alive with the version of himself she believed in. But belief without action dies. And now, she is no longer waiting for him to come back to life. She has her own. And it is full. And it is free. There is a moment in every man's life. A quiet reckoning. A point where the mirrors stop lying. And the silence starts speaking. And in that silence, he doesn't just hear her name. He hears his failure to rise. Not in grand gestures or career accolades, but in intimacy. In presence. In the sacred art of showing up as a whole man. She asked for that. Not out loud, but in her being. Her gaze spoke it. Her touch whispered it. Her very existence called him toward it. And he mistook that call for pressure. He saw her radiance and called it too much. He saw her depth and feared drowning. But it wasn't depth that drowned him. It was his refusal to dive. Because the feminine, when fully expressed, is a force of nature. She doesn't chase. She calls. She doesn't plead. She invites. And when unhealed masculine energy hears the call, it often runs. Runs toward distractions. Toward ego flattery. Toward women who don't ask for more than the surface. Because going deeper means leaving the mask behind. And he loved that mask. He wore it like armor. Thinking it made him strong. Not knowing that real strength is found in removing it. In being seen without defense. She saw beneath it. That was her gift. And her curse. She saw the boy in the man. The tenderness beneath the pride. The ache behind the arrogance. The longing under the charm. And when she loved him, she loved all of him. Even the parts he couldn't love himself. But love, without reciprocation, becomes starvation. And she, the sacred feminine, will not stay starving. So she left. With tears he never saw. With prayers he never heard. With wisdom he wasn't yet ready to receive. And in leaving, she didn't just exit his life. She exited his illusion. The illusion that she would always be there. That her love was unconditional in the unhealthy sense. That she would keep softening so he could stay small. She shattered that illusion with her silence. And now he lives inside the reality she left behind. One where her absence feels more present than any woman beside him. One where her name has become a symbol of what he lost. And what he never became. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." He still doesn't know why he thinks of her. Why he dreams of her. Why her energy hovers when he's most alone. But it's not fate. It's not accident. It's invitation, still lingering. To return to the path he abandoned the moment he abandoned her. Not the path to her. The path to himself. Because she wasn't the destination. She was the mirror. The muse. The catalyst. The woman who becomes a man's shadow is never forgotten. Because she reflects everything he's still afraid to remember. She is in the look he avoids in the mirror. She is in the moment his voice shakes when he says, "I'm fine." She is in the split second where he almost tells the truth, but doesn't. And she is free. Not because she never loved him, but because she finally loved herself more. The wound that once bled for him has become the scar that reminds her of her strength. The silence she once feared has become the space where her spirit sings. The ache she once carried has been composted into power. She walks now with different eyes. She chooses with discernment. She holds space, not for a man's potential, but for his presence. Because she knows. You cannot love someone into their healing. You cannot mother a man into maturity. You cannot be the light for someone still in love with their shadows. You can only be whole, radiant, unafraid. And if he rises, good. If he doesn't, that's his karma, not your cross. She became his shadow. Not to haunt him, but to teach him. That love is not chasing. Love is being. Love is seeing. Love is becoming. And if he ever dares to do the work, to meet his own soul, to face his own wounds, to integrate his own anima, he may find her again, not as a lover, but as a memory that made him better. Until then, he walks with a ghost. A beautiful one. A brutal one. One who reminds him. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.